Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the first edition of Tips Time with Josh Klein. My name is Josh, if you couldn't have already guessed, and I'm an electronic music producer. The point of starting this channel was kind of brought on by an idea between me and another producer friend of mine, but essentially this channel is meant to show anyone that's interested in electronic music or interested in producing, or any kind of music enthusiast that would be interested in learning about what happens behind the scenes with producing music, whether it be electronic or not, and what happens before we hear the final product, I guess, on the radio. So the point of this channel is I'd like to start off with smaller steps and start with some weekly tips that I release, where I'll be going over tips and tricks, things that I've learned so far as I've grown as a producer. A lot of the tips are going to be focused on things revolving around time management, being efficient with your time as a music producer. And then I also want to eventually delve into more detailed things such as synthesizer use, digital audio workstations, and what have you. So I will start off by getting you off of this boring desktop, and we'll move to the digital audio workstation. The one that I use is Ableton, and I'm actually using a loop selection here, which is extremely relevant to the first tip this week. And before I do really dive into the tip of the week, I do want to start by saying being an electronic music producer for about 2.5 years doesn't make me an expert about anything with producing. I'm well aware of that. What I'm hoping this channel can do is, maybe lay some light on what are the first initial things that I learn. What are those fundamental lessons that were really integral to my growth that maybe someone that is a larger producer, someone that is has a larger reach with their fan base, has a lot more popularity, by the time they get pretty large, it may be hard to recall what those first initial fundamental lessons were that they first learned when they started producing. So what I'm hoping here is taking a little bit of a different approach and starting these videos earlier in my producing career, wherever that leads, and sharing the knowledge that I learn along the way. I'm not saying that it's right, what I'm saying, but what I am saying is in hopes to help you, the listener, and spark dialogue. Really, I want to spark conversation, whether it's people commenting. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your tips, other things that you have to share, and in hopes that the things that you say, the things that I say, can create an atmosphere where we are all helping each other, and we can all kind of learn from each other, teach each other, and that can lead to better music being put out there in the electronic music scene. So, now that I'm done that spiel, we'll move on to the track. Like I said, we're starting with a loop selection. So, and I keep these videos pretty concise. I want you guys to be able to take away one tip once a week in a 5 to 8 minute video. So I try and be diligent with how and disciplined with how long I make these videos. So just keep that in mind as well. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. So the first tip that I want to give is regarding loop selections. And loop selections are a great tool for making the audio continue over the course of however many bars you want to set it at. But it's essentially this little tool here, see? So when I right click and then I click it again, it activates the loop selection. A lot of people use it, and it's a fantastic tool for simulating the track essentially, and adding and experimenting with different parts of the track, whether it be percussion, a MIDI pattern, seeing where your low end fits in the mix of your track. Fantastic tool, and I'm going to start with saying that. Now, the lesson I actually want to give, and this is in more reference to when you are working in the loop on one particular portion of your track. So, for example, in this track, I've been working on this for about 3.5 weeks, so it's not finished yet. It's not really close to being finished, but I'm enjoying it so far. And in this loop selection, I have a MIDI clip, which is a combination of notes on a instrument or synthesizer in this case. In this case, I'm using Operator, which is a stock synthesizer on Ableton. And here's just what it sounds. Okay, so you get the idea. That's the loop, and it's a great tool. However, what I will say is when you're working on one portion of the track, such as a MIDI clip, I would advise that you limit the amount of time you spend in the loop. So everything I was just saying, it's a great tool, it's fantastic to use, it's very useful. I would still say when you're working on one portion of the track, I would recommend to limit the amount of time because you can spend a lot of time in the loop and it can actually waste a lot of your time too. So I'm kind of playing on the same principle as when you hear a track that you really love, but you end up getting sick of that track after, say, a week of listening to it straight, or you hear it just a lot and eventually it kind of gets boring to you. Well, the same thing can happen when you listen to a MIDI pattern over and over and over. So maybe that MIDI pattern or that note pattern on whatever synthesizer you're using, maybe that sounded great 25 minutes into your track after you made it, but after about an hour, it just didn't have that same pop to it. It didn't resonate with you as well. So essentially what I'm saying is realize that, have some perspective, and as a producer, a lot of these tips are going to be delving back into the psyche and the mindset of what I've found is useful to be efficient and effective at producing tracks in a timely manner. You don't want to waste too much time in the loop. So my tip would be when you're playing around with a loop, limit the amount of time, set some deadlines for the amount of time you spend in the loop, especially when you're working on one portion of the track in particular. So as a point of reference, and when I'm working on a track, I will set a deadline for about, if I'm working on a loop selection and I'm working on a MIDI pattern and I haven't made something that I really like, that really doesn't have that it factor for me within an hour, then I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to move on to another task and I'll work on that just to give my mind a break. And then I'll move back to it and work on it. Whether that break is 15 minutes, whether it's 3 hours, whether it's a couple days. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But it's kind of just provoking that thought I'm trying to make you aware of, that as a producer, there might be portions of your track that might get a little bit boring at some points. So, like I said, make the limit of the amount of time that you spend, that you decide, I'm still not making a MIDI pattern that I like, so let's move on to another portion of the track. And then there's another time limit that I make. If I have made a MIDI pattern that I really enjoy, that I really like, and I still like it after about an hour, well, then I know that I'm good. Because if I still like that MIDI note, that MIDI pattern, about an hour in, I know it's going to sound great to someone the first time they hear it, or for the first handful of times, or first 10 times that they hear it. So it's about taking a step back, remembering that you're producing the track. Even if I like this MIDI pattern and I loved it after an hour and I decided, okay, I'm going to stick with this, I very well know that I might get bored of it after a couple weeks. But the point is to keep that perspective that you still really liked it when you first originally made it, and now it's just your ears adapting to it. It's kind of just feeling a little boring. It's natural. There's endless amounts of interviews with very successful artists that say, I don't like that track that I made. And it's because they heard it so much. It tends to be the tracks that are the huge hits that the artists don't like anymore because they just had to play it so many times, or they had to hear it so many times. It is natural. So when you're working on a track, by the end of the track, you might not really enjoy the MIDI pattern you've made, or say the rhythm that you made. Maybe it got a little bit boring. The most important thing is to finish that track. So that is why I'm saying to limit the amount of time in the loop. I hope this all makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's any feedback, any other comments or things you'd like to add to what I'm saying, or if you agree with it, if you disagree with it. I'd love to hear it. And if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe or share it, what have you. Like I said and alluded to at the beginning of the channel, the video, this is all brand new, so I appreciate any feedback and any exposure. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you next week.